Amid the glitter of Hollywood's golden years, when stars floated across red carpets like living gods and goddesses, there were secrets that smelled far less heavenly. Behind the gowns, tuxedos, and million-dollar smiles lurked truths that never made the magazines, truths that could make even the boldest fans recoil. These weren't stories of scandals splashed in headlines. They were the hidden, very human realities that co-stars whispered about in dressing rooms and that crew members never dared print until decades later. Because while the world remembers these legends for their beauty and brilliance, those who had to work beside them carried very different memories, ones that clung to them long after the cameras stopped rolling. So who were the icons whose private lives reeked of something less glamorous? And what really happened on sets and stages when the people closest to them could barely stand to breathe the same air? Marilyn Monroe, the smell that stopped Clark Gable in his tracks. When people hear Marilyn Monroe's name, they imagine perfection, platinum hair glowing under studio lights, porcelain skin, and that breathless laugh that could disarm even the coldest heart. But there's one story from the Nevada desert that no amount of Chanel No. 5 could cover. In 1960, Monroe was filming The Misfits alongside Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood. On screen, their chemistry looked effortless. Off-screen, it was another story. The desert heat was punishing, and Marilyn had developed a habit of re-wearing the same dress for days at a time, skipping showers, and relying on perfume and powder to mask what lingered underneath. Crew members whispered that when she leaned in for a kiss scene, the odor hit Gable so hard he nearly gagged. Lighting technicians said the smell carried across the set. Makeup artists packed deodorant and talcum powder like emergency supplies, praying she'd let them use it. One assistant swore Gable muttered to a colleague, "This could take down a horse," before storming off set to collect himself. The studio press release only hinted that the desert heat was challenging, but those who were there never forgot. And as bad as that moment was, Marilyn wasn't the only legend hiding an unpleasant secret. Charlie Chaplin, the genius who refused to wash. Charlie Chaplin, the man who made the world laugh without saying a single word. His films were masterpieces of timing and heart, but those who had to share a room with him weren't laughing. Chaplin was known for one rule: when inspiration struck, hygiene could wait. He would wear the same wool suit for days during filming, sweat soaking through under hot studio lamps. Costumes, hats, and even makeup brushes went unwashed, sometimes for an entire season. Crew members recalled that during the editing of City Lights, the stench became so overwhelming that every window in the cutting room had to be thrown open just to breathe. A co-star once secretly dabbed perfume on his collar before a close-up, just to make it through the day. Chaplin once admitted, almost proudly, that real life didn't need to be flawless. But for those around him, the memory of sitting in an enclosed space with the great comedian was less about laughter and more about trying not to choke. And if Chaplin's eccentric refusal to wash was strange, the next case was even harder to stomach because it came not from clothes, but from breath itself. Elvis Presley, the King's infamous breath. Elvis Presley was adored as the ultimate heartthrob. On stage, he could make women faint with a single curl of his lip, but offstage, kissing him was something entirely different. Co-stars described it as a nightmare. Elvis had a habit of drinking strong black coffee, chain-smoking Camels, and taking heavy medications often minutes before shooting a love scene. The result was a breath so thick and pungent, it made actresses fight to hold back tears. One Miss America winner who acted beside him swore she nearly fainted during a romantic scene. Another said it was like kissing an old ashtray dipped in cough syrup. Crew members even had a nickname for it: the King's Breath. Tabloids caught wind of the whispers, running headlines like Elvis's morphine-flavored kiss. Fans thought it was exaggeration, but those who worked with him nodded quietly. Because for them, every love scene felt like a test of endurance. Still, Elvis wasn't alone in this. Another queen of Hollywood's golden age was accused of hiding her own hygiene habits under gallons of perfume. Elizabeth Taylor. The perfume mask. Elizabeth Taylor, diamonds, silk gowns, and a face that defined glamour. But when she played Cleopatra in Rome, the heat exposed a side of her the press rarely talked about. Rumors swirled that Taylor often skipped bathing for days, covering herself instead with heavy layers of perfume. On the crowded set of Cleopatra, under lights that pushed the temperature past 100 degrees, that choice became a disaster. A wardrobe assistant reportedly fainted while adjusting her gown, overwhelmed by the mix of sweat, melting makeup, and overpowering fragrance. Crew members described rushing outside for air, while industrial fans blasted across the set. Tabloids called it Cleopatra's hidden secret, while those on set quietly prayed she'd finally take a shower. But Taylor wasn't the only star whose beauty hid something less pleasant. The ultimate gentleman of the screen carried a problem no one dared mention until years later. Clark Gable, Hollywood's gentleman with a deadly secret. Clark Gable was the embodiment of charm. Women swooned, men wanted to be him, and his role in Gone with the Wind cemented him as a legend. But beneath that perfect smile was something his co-stars dreaded: his breath. Gable had suffered from gum disease and wore dentures early in his career. Unfortunately, he didn't take care of them. Combined with his heavy drinking and smoking, the result was a stench so infamous that even Vivien Leigh, his leading lady, confessed she had to hold her breath during kissing scenes. One actress compared kissing him to leaning over a manhole. Others remembered leaving the set to throw up after a romantic scene. Ironically, Gable once criticized Marilyn Monroe for her hygiene, but behind closed doors, he was battling the very same problem. Still, at least Gable tried to maintain appearances. Some stars went in the opposite direction, obsessing over cleanliness to such extremes that it pushed people away. Joan Crawford, the cleanliness obsession. Joan Crawford's homes were spotless, terrifyingly so. Friends described her houses as smelling more like hospitals than living spaces, with bleach and disinfectant overpowering the air. She would wipe glasses between sips, scrub fingerprints from tables in front of guests, and even force visitors to change clothes before entering her living room. One assistant claimed the bleach smell was so strong that it made guests sick to their stomachs. Instead of drawing people closer, her obsession drove them away. To Hollywood, she was the perfect star, but to anyone invited into her home, it felt like being trapped in a sterile laboratory. And if Joan was too clean, another star swung to the opposite extreme, earning the title of one of Hollywood's worst-smelling legends. Errol Flynn, the party aftermath. Errol Flynn was every bit the swashbuckling adventurer he played on screen. But behind the velvet suits and dazzling grin, he often carried the smell of his wild nights straight onto set. Stories circulated of Flynn showing up to shoot after all-night parties, still in the same clothes, hair reeking of cigarettes, sweat soaked into his shirt, and the sharp sting of liquor on his breath. One actress said kissing him felt like inhaling straight from a rum bottle. Crew members joked that gas masks should have been listed on the call sheet. And while Flynn wore his recklessness proudly, others tried to hide behind perfume, denial, or silence. Yet the stories trickled out over time, piece by piece, until Hollywood's sparkling surface was chipped away. The hidden truth of Hollywood. These aren't the stories you'll see in glossy magazines or red carpet interviews. They're the whispered truths of co-stars who had to endure scenes they'd rather forget, of makeup artists who fought nausea just to finish their job, and of assistants who carried secrets for decades. Because behind the perfect images Hollywood projected, these stars were human, messy, flawed, and sometimes unbearable to be around. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Perfection on screen is just an illusion. The closer you get, the more the cracks begin to show. So now the question is, if you had the chance to meet these icons in real life, would you still be starstruck? Or would you be praying for fresh air?